In a small village in Uganda, a little girl named Nakalima carried a dream bigger than her tiny hands. She wanted to sit in a classroom, hold a book, and write her name like other children. But her parents shook their heads. Education is wasted on girls, they told her. Your place is in the kitchen. While her brothers walked proudly with books under their arms, Nakalima walked with heavy bundles of firewood. Her eyes followed the children on the dusty road to school, and her heart longed to join them, but her voice was always silenced. At night, when everyone slept, she drew letters in the sand by the light of a dying lantern. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks, but she whispered to herself, "One day, I will learn. One day, I will change everything." Though her hands were rough from chores and her feet cracked from endless farm work, her spirit refused to break. Villagers mocked her, calling her foolish for dreaming. Hunger grew in her family, and still no one believed her life could mean more than cooking and carrying water. One evening, a retired teacher named Okello noticed her tracing words in the dust. He saw the fire in her eyes and secretly gave her old books. Under a mango tree, he taught her to read and write. For the first time, Nakalima felt her heart come alive. But when her parents discovered this, they beat her and forbade her from ever seeing Okello again. "Books will not fill our stomachs," they shouted. Her body ached, but her mind was sharper than ever, and in secret she continued to learn. Years later, tragedy struck. Her family's crops failed, and hunger turned their laughter into silence. Debts piled high, and those who once mocked her struggled to find a single meal. Nakalima, now grown, refused to bow to despair. With the little knowledge she had, she began baking small loaves of bread. She sold them in the market, saving every coin. Day and night she worked until her bread stall became a food shop, and her food shop became a restaurant where people from every corner came to eat. Her success grew beyond measure, and soon she was feeding the same villagers who once mocked her, including her own parents. When they entered her restaurant, heads lowered in shame, she served them with a gentle smile. "You refused me knowledge," she said softly, "but knowledge fed me, and now it feeds you too." Today, Nakalima stands tall, serving food to all who come hungry. Her story whispers a lesson: rejection cannot kill destiny. The stone they once threw away has become the cornerstone that feeds an entire village. At night, when the village grew quiet and the lamps went out, Nakalima lay awake listening to the soft voices of her brothers as they studied by candlelight. Their books glowed in the dim flame, pages whispering with knowledge she was not allowed to touch. She turned to the wall, pressing her face against her pillow, and silent tears rolled down her cheeks. She cried not because of the chores or the heavy work, but because the world of learning she longed for was kept far from her reach. She could hear her brothers repeating words, and each sound was like a knife reminding her of the door that had been locked against her. When the house finally slept, Nakalima would slip outside. The cold earth met her bare feet, and the stars above watched her secret ritual. With a small stick, she drew letters in the sand, copying the shapes she had seen in her brother's books. Her heart raced as if she were stealing from a forbidden treasure. Sometimes the wind erased her lines before she finished, but she always began again, whispering the letters under her breath, letting hope fight against despair. There were nights when hunger twisted her stomach and tears blurred her eyes, but she still bent down to the ground, tracing those marks as though each one carried her future. She imagined herself in a classroom, raising her hand, writing neatly on a slate. The picture lived in her mind so strongly that it gave her strength to face another day of carrying firewood and scrubbing pots. Her parents never saw those moments, and even if they had, they would have laughed. "A girl's dream will not change her life," they always said. But Nakalima believed differently. Beneath her pain, she carried a promise. As she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, she whispered to the night, "One day, I will not only learn, I will change everything." The stars above seemed to listen, and her words echoed deep inside her heart. That promise became her secret comfort. Each night, when others rested, she planted seeds of hope in the soil of her dreams. The letters in the sand disappeared by morning, washed away by footsteps and wind, but in her memory they remained sharp and alive. She held on to them as tightly as she held on to life itself. Though the world tried to silence her, Nakalima's tears were not weakness, they were the watering of a dream that refused to die. From the moment the sun rose, Nakalima's day began with heavy work. She carried water from the stream in a pot bigger than her small body. When she staggered into the house, there was no rest. She was sent to the fields, where her hands dug into the dry soil, planting seeds that often failed to grow. Her clothes were worn, her feet cracked, but no one cared. While other children's voices filled the schoolyard with laughter, Nakalima's life was chained to chores. She washed clothes by the river, cooked for her brothers, and swept the compound until her back ached. Childhood slipped away from her like water through open fingers. The villagers noticed her struggle, but instead of pity, they mocked her. That girl thinks she will be somebody. Never, they laughed as she bent under the weight of firewood. Their words cut deeper than the thorns that scratched her skin. She lowered her eyes, hiding the hurt, but inside she held on to a silent defiance. Still, the jeers followed her everywhere, a reminder that in their eyes she was nothing more than a servant girl. Her family's poverty grew heavier with each passing season. Droughts burned the crops, hunger lived in the house, and her parents fought over debts. Sometimes there was no food, and Nakalima went to bed with an empty stomach, staring at the roof, wondering if life would always be this way. Even in those moments, when despair pressed hard, her dream of learning did not die. She told herself that one day she would break the chains, even if nobody believed in her now. Her brothers, who went to school, looked down on her too. They waved their books in front of her as if to remind her of what she had been denied. She cooked for them, cleaned their clothes, and listened as they recited lessons she was never allowed to hear properly. Sometimes she repeated their words quietly to herself, hiding the sound beneath the grinding of the millstone. The days were long, the work unending, and her young body often trembled with exhaustion. Yet deep within, a flame flickered, refusing to go out. The laughter of the villagers, the disbelief of her family, the hunger that gnawed at her belly, none of it destroyed the small but unshakable voice inside her heart. Though the world saw her as weak and useless, Nakalima knew her story was not finished. She carried hardship like a heavy load, but she also carried hope like a secret treasure. One hot afternoon, as Nakalima knelt outside her home drawing crooked letters in the dust with a small stick, an old man passing by stopped to watch. His name was Okello, a retired teacher who had once taught many children in the village. His eyes softened as he saw how carefully she traced each mark, whispering the sounds to herself. Most people laughed at her for this, but Okello did not laugh. He stepped closer and asked gently, "Do you wish to learn, child?" Startled, Nakalima looked up, unsure if she should answer, but the longing in her eyes spoke before her lips could. From that day, Okello decided to help her. He had no classroom, no chalkboard, no shining desks, but he had knowledge and a heart that believed in her. He searched through his small wooden chest and brought out old, worn books with torn pages. To Nakalima, they looked like treasures more precious than gold. With a smile, he handed them to her and whispered, "Hide these well. They will be your secret doorway." Every evening, when the work in her home was done, Nakalima would sneak away quietly to meet him under the wide branches of a mango tree. The breeze carried the smell of ripe fruit as Okello guided her hand, teaching her how letters joined together to make words. Slowly, her eyes learned to dance across the pages. She stumbled, she struggled, but she never gave up. Each word she read filled her heart with a joy that washed away her tears. In those secret lessons, Nakalima discovered a new world. She could read simple stories, write her name, and even count numbers that once looked like strange drawings. Her heart beat faster with every step forward, as though she was breaking open the chains that had tied her down for so long. Okello's patience gave her courage, and his faith in her made her believe that perhaps she was not foolish after all. Though she knew the danger if her parents found out, she continued to meet him. The mango tree became her hidden classroom, its shade sheltering a dream no one could see. Sometimes she sat there even after lessons ended, clutching her books against her chest, feeling as though she was holding her future in her arms. The fire inside her, once dim and buried under chores and mockery, now began to burn brighter. For the first time in her life, Nakalima felt hope was not just a dream, it was real, and it was hers. One evening, Nakalima's father returned from the fields earlier than usual. As he walked past the mango tree, he saw her crouched beside Okello, clutching a tattered book. His face darkened. Without a word, he stormed over, yanked the book from her hands, and slapped her so hard she stumbled to the ground. Her mother came running, shouting in anger, and together they dragged her home. That night, the whole house shook with their fury. "You shame us, Nakalima," her mother screamed. "Girls do not waste time on books." Her father raised his stick and beat her until her cries filled the compound. "Books will not fill our stomachs," he roared. "You will never see that old man again." Bruised and trembling, Nakalima sat in the corner, her tears mixing with the dust. Her brothers watched from the doorway, their faces smug, as if her punishment proved she deserved nothing better. She wanted to scream that learning was not a crime, but her voice was trapped inside her chest. Her parents locked away the torn book as if it were poison, warning her that if she ever returned to Okello, she would be cast out. But even as pain seared her body, her spirit refused to bow. She remembered the letters she had traced in the sand, the words Okello had taught her, the sound of her own voice finally reading. Those memories became her secret treasure. At night, when the house slept, she whispered the alphabet to herself, fearing the darkness would steal it if she stayed silent. Days turned heavy with work again, fetching water, cooking, tilling the land, but her mind no longer felt chained. She scratched words into the ground with her toe while carrying firewood. She repeated lessons in her head as she stirred porridge. She carved letters on sticks and hid them under her mat, practicing when no one was watching. Though she could no longer sit under the mango tree, Nakalima still caught glimpses of Okello from afar. He would lift his hand quietly in greeting, his eyes reminding her that knowledge could not be beaten out of her. Each secret glance gave her courage. She realized that while her parents could lock books away, they could not lock away what was already inside her. Heartbroken but unbroken, Nakalima carried her lessons in silence. The beatings left scars on her skin, but her determination grew stronger. What her parents thought they had destroyed was only taking deeper root, waiting for the day it would rise. The years passed, and the laughter in Nakalima's home slowly faded into silence. The land that once gave food turned dry and cracked. Season after season, the rains failed, and the crops withered before they could grow. Hunger settled in the house like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. Her father's strong arms weakened, her mother's face thinned, and her brothers, who once mocked her, now sat with hollow eyes staring at empty plates. The debts grew so high that neighbors whispered about the family losing their land. The villagers who had laughed at Nakalima's dreams were not spared either. Their granaries stood empty, their children cried from hunger, and the once proud voices were now filled with desperation. People who had mocked her carried bowls, begging for food wherever they could find it. The entire village seemed broken, crushed under the weight of poverty and hunger. By this time, Nakalima was no longer a little girl. She had grown into a young woman, her hands hardened by years of labor, but her mind sharper than ever. The lessons she had learned in secret never left her. Every word, every number, every bit of knowledge she had stolen in the shadows lived inside her, waiting for the right moment to rise. And now, that moment had come. She looked around at her family's suffering. The brothers who once flashed their books at her now sat hopeless, unable to use their learning to bring food to the table. Her parents, who had beaten her for studying, now bowed under the shame of hunger. As Nakalima watched them, a quiet strength filled her chest. She realized she could not let despair win. In the brokenness of her home, she saw an opportunity. While others complained and waited for help, she began to think of solutions. She remembered the markets she had once passed, the smell of bread and roasted food that always drew crowds. She thought of the little knowledge she had gathered, numbers, reading, the discipline of learning, and she knew she could turn it into something useful. It was in that moment, surrounded by hunger and hopelessness, that Nakalima's determination hardened like steel. The same rejection that once felt like her curse was about to become her strength. She decided she would not only survive but rise, and in her rise, she would lift others too. What the world thought was the end became the beginning of her story. Nakalima rose before dawn, while the village still slept, and lit a small fire outside her home. With a handful of flour borrowed on credit and a little water, she began to knead dough with her tired hands. The smell of fresh bread soon drifted into the air, and though her clothes were worn and her tools simple, her determination gave her strength. When the first batch was ready, she wrapped the loaves in an old cloth and carried them to the market on her head. People, hungry and desperate, stopped to taste, and the warmth of her bread spread hope in a place where hunger had taken root. The few coins she earned that day were not spent. She tucked them safely away, determined to make them grow. The next morning, she returned with more loaves, working harder, her hands blistered but her heart firm. Slowly, people began to recognize her stall, and word spread of the girl whose bread was always soft, fresh, and filling. Some laughed that she was too small to build anything lasting, but others returned daily, drawn not only by the food but by the light in her eyes that spoke of resilience. Day and night, Nakalima worked without rest. She gathered firewood, fetched water, and mixed dough until her arms shook from exhaustion. Yet every coin she made was saved, each one a brick in the dream she was quietly building. She refused to waste even a shilling. Instead of buying new clothes or trinkets, she reinvested in flour, firewood, and better pans. Her stall grew slowly but steadily, one step at a time. As weeks turned into months, her business began to outgrow the small space she had started with. The market buzzed with people eager to taste her bread, and soon she added roasted maize and simple stews. She crafted a small wooden table and covered it with an old cloth, creating what looked like a tiny food stall. To her surprise, crowds began to gather, waiting in line. The girl who once carried firewood now carried baskets of bread, and instead of mockery, she was met with hungry smiles. Nakalima's stall became a place of warmth in the village. Travelers stopped to eat, mothers came with their children, and even those who had doubted her now stood among her customers. From nothing but determination, she had built the beginning of something great. Her journey had only just started, but already she was proving that rejection could not kill destiny. The small stall that once held a few loaves of bread soon grew into something far greater. Nakalima had saved every coin, and instead of stopping, she dreamed bigger. With time, she built a larger space in the marketplace, adding wooden benches and a roof of iron sheets. Her menu expanded from bread and roasted maize to steaming pots of beans, rice, and meat. The smell of her cooking floated across the market, drawing people from every corner. What began with a handful of loaves now stood as a lively food place where laughter and conversation filled the air. Her hands alone could no longer meet the demand, so Nakalima began to employ others. Young girls who once carried water with her now stood by her side, stirring pots and serving plates. Men who had mocked her now asked for work, and she gave them tasks with humility. Slowly, her business became more than just a stall. It was a restaurant where everyone, from travelers to farmers, came to eat. Nakalima was no longer seen as the poor girl burdened with chores. She was now the woman who fed the village. Rich or poor, young or old, her tables were open to all. Farmers came after the fields, children gathered after school, and even the elders sat proudly, enjoying meals that reminded them of better days. People began to call her the girl who feeds everyone, a name spoken with respect and gratitude. Her restaurant became the beating heart of the community, a place where hunger was forgotten, even if only for a while. The change reached her own family too. The parents who had once beaten her for reading now found themselves sitting in her restaurant, eating the food she had provided. Her brothers, once proud and dismissive, now depended on her generosity. At first, they came quietly, but soon it became clear, they needed her more than she needed them. Nakalima served them without bitterness, proving that kindness can outgrow pain. Her success was not built on luck but on resilience, sacrifice, and determination. What others thought was impossible had become a reality. The girl denied education now created opportunities for others, feeding not just stomachs but also hope. Her story spread beyond the village, inspiring many who had once believed dreams were only for the privileged. From the ashes of rejection, Nakalima had risen. Her restaurant was not just a place of food, it was a living symbol that destiny cannot be denied. One quiet afternoon, when the restaurant was busy with customers, Nakalima looked up and froze. At the doorway stood her parents, her brothers, and even distant relatives. Their clothes were torn, their faces thin, their steps heavy with shame. For years they had avoided her, but hunger had finally broken their pride. They stood silently, unable to meet her eyes, as if the weight of the past pressed down on their shoulders. The same voices that once mocked her now trembled with weakness, and in that moment, the tables had truly turned. The restaurant went quiet as people recognized them. Whispers filled the room, but Nakalima did not let anger cloud her face. Instead, she walked forward calmly and guided them to a table. Her parents bowed their heads low, too ashamed to speak, while her brothers fidgeted, their confidence gone. Nakalima's heart remembered the nights of tears, the beatings, the words that cut her dreams, but she also remembered her promise, to change everything, not with hatred, but with strength. Without hesitation, she served them steaming plates of food. She placed bread, rice, and stew before them, the very meals that had built her future. They lifted their eyes in surprise, expecting rejection, but she only smiled softly. Her kindness struck them harder than any punishment could have. As they ate hungrily, unable to hold back their tears, Nakalima finally spoke. Her voice was steady, filled with quiet power. "You refused me knowledge," she said, "but knowledge fed me, and now it feeds you too." The words hung in the air, echoing louder than any shout. Her parents' eyes filled with tears, her brothers lowered their heads, and her relatives could not utter a word. The same girl they had once dismissed now sat before them as the woman who carried their survival. The customers in the restaurant watched with respect. Some nodded, others whispered prayers, knowing they were witnessing more than just a meal. It was justice wrapped in mercy, a powerful return that no one could deny. Nakalima had not only risen above her pain but had chosen forgiveness over revenge. As her family ate in silence, she walked back to her work, her head high. The girl who once begged for a chance to learn had become the woman who gave without asking anything in return. Her strength was not in wealth or success alone, it was in her ability to rise above rejection and still choose love. The sun was setting over the village, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, and Nakalima's restaurant was alive with life. The sound of clattering plates mixed with children's laughter, and the smell of fresh food drifted through the air. A long line of villagers stretched outside her door, farmers covered in dust from the fields, mothers with babies on their backs, and children clutching empty bowls. None were turned away. Nakalima moved from table to table, her smile warm, her hands busy serving food. What had begun as a few loaves of bread had grown into a place where no one went hungry. Inside, the benches were full, yet no one complained. People talked with joy, sharing stories and laughter as they ate. The poor sat beside the wealthy, the old beside the young, and all were treated the same. Strangers who once mocked her now spoke her name with pride. She was no longer just Nakalima the servant girl, she was Nakalima the woman who fed them all. As she placed food into the hands of a hungry child, her mind drifted back to the nights when she had drawn letters in the sand, hiding her tears in the darkness. She remembered the beatings, the rejection, the shame of being told she would never be anything. Yet here she stood, stronger than the pain, her dream no longer hidden but alive in the faces of those she now lifted. When the last plate was served, and the laughter filled the evening air, Nakalima's voice rose gently, carrying a lesson that came from the depths of her journey. "Never let rejection kill your dream," she said, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "The stone they threw away may one day become the cornerstone of the house." The villagers listened in silence, her words sinking deeper than any meal she had served. Her restaurant glowed with lantern light, but the true light came from her story. She had proven that education denied could not kill destiny, that even when every door was shut, determination could carve a path through stone. The girl who had once been silenced by others had become a voice of hope for all. As the people left with full stomachs and brighter hearts, Nakalima stood at the doorway, watching them disappear into the night. She knew her journey was far from over, but one truth was clear: dreams, no matter how rejected, always find their way home.